Okay. Uh, I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna let this roll for a second. Um, Hopefully, I'll pick up on some people. Yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a long minute since I've actually gone live. So, yeah, I'm gonna let it roll. And try to. I'm really not that good at it. It's like I lived so much of a life that the hardest thing is remembering it so that you can recall it at times like this after the fact when you're so full of things that you want to explain it. But it is so much, and it's become so much that it overwhelms you with the desire to actually express, because, well, it's not like I'm that big at doing this thing, this internet thing, this broadcast thing, and yet I follow a lot of people, and in the process of me following a lot of people, I really, I mean, I feel what they're saying, but there's so much right now going on. There's so much. Uh, you know, my birthday was last week. To get that out the way. So, for those of you who wish me well and whatnot, and even others who donated and whatnot, I really do appreciate that. I really do. And for any of you others that would like to do so, you can find my Cash App on my YouTube page of this broadcast. Yeah, because the struggle is real right now. I'm broadcasting under the impression that this is all fair use of background, whatever. But in one weekend we got my birthday, we got Juneteenth. Juneteenth was a big one. Let me tell you why. Because this is WNDC NDC. WNDC NDC stands for We in the Crib and You Ain't in DC. And what stands out the most is the mere fact that Washingtonians have this one rare kind of celebration that kind of is similar and yet more important, because back in that era, we're talking past our pre Emancipation Proclamation time and era. From the first brick on, there had been people of color that have existed here in the district from its first brick. We all know that. Many of them were free, and many of them were enslaved. But all of them had a craft and a purpose into which they were in this environment, because this environment was intended to be very special in preparation for this whole new world existence, as it was due to, become as prophesized. And so what stands out the most about this whole subject is the mere fact that there was a thing called the Washington Emancipation, or District's Emancipation, or DC Emancipation. And what actually existed there is something so rare that it only happened one time, but it was so successful that it's the driving force that actually convinced our president at the time, Mr. Lincoln, to actually draft up the Emancipation Proclamation for all people of color, all enslaved people in this country. And yet, what stands out the most in my mind is the mere fact that from the Emancipation Proclamation to Juneteenth, which consequently was the cause of the Washingtonians actually finding out that Texas was not compliant with the memo and literally formed not just a Union army, but a black, a people of color Union army that marched all the way to Texas's capital in order for them to stand up on things and go, "Y'all's free." And that became what we call Juneteenth. And while it's something to celebrate, for people of Washingtonians especially, it's somewhat of a slight due to the mere fact that they were free before the Emancipation Proclamation. And the difference is that each and every one of these people that were federally free had purpose in their life. They knew what they were and were about, even though they were rather enslaved or not. And so this drum circle thing that we do is the celebration of all, is the emancipation of all Washingtonians. Prior to that, on Sunday, the one day we have the shine, everybody would come out to the park, and if they were free, they'd bring their drum and they'd go out and they'd fellowship with the other people out in the park. And if they were enslaved, then they had to at least perform somewhat in order for them to possibly be allowed to take their drum to the park. And so and in the process of this, when they emancipated all Washingtonians, they just didn't say y'all's free. They actually went to each one of the owners and literally paid the worth or the wealth that they expected from them, and then put money in their pocket, and then said, if you don't want to stay, you can stay and you can be treated as equal. I mean, you no longer become, slave labor. You become master carpenter or craftsman because of your craft and whatnot, and your existence, or you can go ahead and we'll give you enough money to get started somewhere else in the country. And it basically worked so well because the majority of the people stayed. And so where there was a slave that was also helping doing the bricks and the things like the slave who invented a new way of doing metal work, to be capable of inventing a new way to actually build what becomes Lady Freedom, which is at the top of our capital. And yet, had he been emancipated, he would have been able to choose his own last name and actually get bona fide credit for his work and whatnot as well. And what makes that so important is that the whole concept of Juneteenth, while it was so special for a lot of people to, celebrate respectfully, the problem is that both the Emancipation Proclamation and the Juneteenth kind of insert was not so fair to the people that it freed, because they were not equipped to understand what freedom really mean and the responsibility of it. And therefore, we all know that in history, the next stage of our revolution came the slavery by another name, and people were starting to find people who were just easily pickings and put them to work on prison farms and whatnot. And therefore, we had a whole different concept of, slavery and whatnot. And here we are now today, 2021, and it's a federal holiday. And we are now capable of at least being able to know that each and every person of color should, by any means or fashion, know at this point more than anything else, is there is nothing that's stopping you from being able to be the best that you are within reason, due to the mere fact that you now are officially free, like all the other people that were freed before you, including the emancipation of all Washingtonians. And the emancipation of all Washingtonians was so important because these people who lived here on the dirt that I live on have been the curators for all that we have found in our struggle and whatnot. And the emancipation of all Washingtonians was so intricate that it became the reason why we got an extra day on our taxes due to the mere fact that it fell on the same day of the emancipation, DC Washingtonian emancipation, and everybody had off. So all government employees that lived here as well, and so now we have a lot of work to do because while we're still trying to drive into this whole emancipation thing, the biggest issue is our miseducation, manipulation, or the lack of education that could be more empowering to our people without them having to feel like they have to fight for something that's theirs. It's been theirs all this time, but they never knew. Kind of like the story of the Wizard of Oz or whatnot, when they, get to the Oz and, and after all that stuff that goes on in the movie, the little witch comes down and she says, you could have gone anytime you wanted to. You could have been after that if you only knew. And that's where we're at now. We're in an only knew situation. And there's a lot of opposition to this just due to the mere fact that there's been a lot of people who have been capable of being able to benefit in their existence due to the mere fact that, if nothing else, they've been accustomed to at least being qualified at being greater than people of color, at least. And yet, the same oppressor that we speak of is the same oppressor that oppresses them as well, because it's not just a free-for-all for people of non-color. That 1% doesn't necessarily have the qualifications of color involved. So here we are. And now we're into the summer solstice, and it's 2021, and it's the age of the Aquarius in effect. And this whole wobble in the world is not even going to stop until 2033. And yet in the past several years, we've experienced some very major cultural shifts and changes that many of us morally professed just years prior that it would never get to where it's at. And, last year was Black Lives Matter. This year it's Juneteenth. And yet every year we're finding new and improved ways of healing the wounds of a nation that has been divided more on race than anything else. And as we commence this newfound cultural mixing of all of the nations and the nationalities and the races and whatnot, we also are evolving. No longer are we just trying to be the bigger, the badder person on earth. We now have got to a point where this perfect union has to be in more of a world perspective, and yet we're slowly getting there, and it's very uncomfortable for many people who come from that privilege of sorts of the last few decades or generations or whatnot, culturally. But me personally, a lot of times I really struggle with trying to find a way of really being able to express the appreciation that I have for all those that are out there that have prayed, cared, donated, spoke, thought, or just paid me any form of attention, rather good or bad, for me to have gotten this far, in considering the situation and whatnot that we're all dealing with still right now. In my little neighborhood, I sit in a neighborhood that actually literally is on the Smithsonian Institute's African American History Trail, officially. And they've got Langston Hughes and all these other people. And I just learned about Anna J. Cooper, whom was very instrumental in a lot of the things that happened, and she was a feminist before feminists start becoming feminists. And what I loved about her feminism is she wasn't just speaking for the raising or the respecting of Black women, but she made a point of making sure that it did not exclude black men in its value as well. And I think due to the mere fact that, the last little transition that we've had has been more tilted towards the feminist side enough to not allow there to be a fair and equal kind of emancipation in the genders of our race and culture. And therefore, it's caused even us within ourselves to struggle even more so today with this generational kind of stigma and instinct that's built on more folklore and stereotypes than we can honestly speak of. Or, it's hard to be even honest. It's harder for us to be transparent. It's harder for us to literally be empathic and not apathic, just due to the mere fact that it's still something for each and every one of us to deal with. The mere fact that even though many other people look at us as privileged, that still doesn't mean that we're really honestly at the promised land of all things, and they're not. We're still struggling through the 1% type mentality and whatnot, and we can't break ourselves from it due to the mere fact that we're still holding on to, yes, Freddie Silver, I like that. That's a good phrase. I'm gonna put that up there. My man Freddie pretty much said it. The only entity that's suppressing you is you. And in a lot of cases, what makes that even more real is the mere fact that for us as people of color, just the lack of understanding that it's been us, and really honestly, the powers that we would believe exist, really honestly come more so from our inability to understand. Nothing's stopping us anymore. There's less and less stopping us, but our ability to get up and get out and do something more, to stop actually dreaming of our existence to be complete in the location into which we were born, or we were raised, or we occupied now. The more traveled we become, the more people will believe and understand and witness the specialty of whom we are. If we are only capable of breaking the bonds of us being sequestered to live and exist in our own realm of suffering for the fear of all of the other people believing that you sold out or left them. You ain't left you. The time you come back, you should come back in better condition. And therein lies half of the problem we have with the emancipated people of privilege of color today, who, while they bask in a lot of their newfound celebrity or finance or whatnot, half of the issue that we have is that many of them have not found the right way to also give back, to pay, to play it forward, to really honestly create, more of a space for more of us and the direction into which allowed them to be whom they are. And a lot of us have grown very spoiled in our mentality to believe that we need to be saved, when, like in the folklore statement of Harriet Tubman, it became to a point where, we could save more people if we could only convince them that they were enslaved, only due to the mere fact that they allow and accept it, just due to their inability to believe that they can get up and move, just have a purpose. And, we want to be all that we can be for each other, and yet we are incapable of understanding that, some of what prevents us from being able to be more unified is our ability to justify the worth and the wealth of each other through our own cultural perspectives instead of going and traveling around the country in other different communities enough to see how, it's all of us, but, got to have a purpose, got to have a special reason for you to be here. And I'm sitting back and I'm reading about all these people in our history that have not been taught to us that existed. I mean, when I walk past houses that I later find out are places that historical people have lived in. When I play at the park, we call it Malcolm X Park, but it's the Wanzer house that Malcolm X lived in, which is a half a block from the park. And they speak of the park as such, just due to the mere fact that it was at its greatest when he was living there. But prior to that, years prior, in that same house, Marcus Garvey was known to have rented a room, and yet they don't call it Marcus Garvey Park. But you understand where I'm going with this. Now, here we are, and we're in a new era. We're in a whole new era as people of color. There's so many things that have been bequeathed to us in just the last few years that we have less obstacles. We have no LBGT. We have no people of color. We have no slave blood. We have no lodge or Masonic affiliations within our culture and our communities that should relieve some of the pressures that we as people of color have allowed ourselves to exist in, and yet we're still dealing with that. We're still dealing with the discomfort, and that's okay. We're working on it, but living in this place, this district, this walking on dirt that you've known that empowered people of color have been on for 200 years puts you in such a state of awe. In a state of awe where, you find that while you sit back and you're suffering from writer's block and just the mere fact that you wish that you could just sit back and write. And I think for a lot of the people that were novelists back then, they had it easier due to the mere fact that they didn't have so many distractions like TV and, and the internet and all this other stuff like that could have you, just checking in on TikTok could have you on it for so long that by the time that you realize you got sucked in, you really honestly are too engrossed in watching the other brilliance to even consider producing your own, just due to the mere fact that, well, that's the way the nature of this thing is. And that's kind of where Juneteenth is. We've got a lot of people, they want to celebrate their freedom, but they don't want to actually exploit it. They don't want to actually take advantage of the indulgence that it could offer you if you were only free to be whatever you want. Nobody's stopping you from a lot of things. Like my man Freddie said, the only thing suppressing you is you. And what's suppressing the you that's being suppressed more than anything is a lack of acceptance of this education. It's not just knowing that these people existed. It's believing that they are no different than you are. And still trying to find other people who would be capable of believing the same, and then finding a way of partnering into some form of journey. That's where I'm at. I'm stuck with this because, it's not that simple or easy to just say, yo, man, I just need a crew and I could blow up. And yet, we're still struggling with this pandemic shit, it's way past vax or no vax. It's at, so what are we going to do in the meantime? We've got a lot of people that wish so much that they, if they only just knew people or met people or really honestly got a chance to see in others the drive, the principle, the persona, the conviction, and their desire of being productive with or without you, enough for you to be more capable of earning a partnership of sorts that was more driven on purpose than personal gain or perspective. And everybody wants to be the big shot, but nobody wants to do the work. I'm all over the place right now. And I'm still reeling from a lot of that, but most of all, I'm really in need of expressing my gratitude to so many of you who have reached out at so many moments and times that I was unaware of the need to actually be bequeathed so much blessing, so much love, and so much attention. And I'm not saying that I'm, popular or blowing up or this, that, and the other. I mean, I could always use a few more fans and a few more haters, in life, but more than anything else, um, realizing that just because I'm in a state of singular so much now more than ever doesn't mean that things are impossible. It just means that things are too unique for it to just be so instantly fixed. And for that reason, I make this because we have a need to open up and try to express and maybe even hopefully gain the attentions of others uh, from a human perspective and not just from what do you have for me. Um, was mentioning how, lots of people out there right now, this big thing, this big crusade over, wanting love, wanting that unconditional kind of love thing and whatnot, and how people are so desperately driven to, craving that love thing that they're unaware of the mere fact that they're incapable of of the fair exchange of energy that it requires you to be that, due to the mere fact that their favorite word is loyal. And how can you be loyal to something that you're not, because it's not built on a purpose, it's built on a person. And if in fact you are out there and you're incapable of keeping your eyes on a prize, then expecting each and every person to basically solely be driven to be uh, in a desire of just sending without receiving is no more greater than, people who want to find new ways to parent, and you don't want to beat your child, but you want to aspire them. But how do you aspire them when you have to, break them from bad habits and give them good habits and instill into them the interest and the importance of them wanting to be greater than the generations before, and wanting to be a credit to not just their generations but their race. And we have ancestors that we walk on all day every day that are literally screaming, and cheering for us to go get it. And we're not capable of hearing that because we're so structured, manipulated, and unspiritually driven, or temperamented enough to understand when that's happening. That thing that drove a lot of our ancestors to get us where we are today. And for too many of us right now, we're too engrossed in the occupation of so many miracles that don't exist for people of color and places around the world. Let me make sure that I'm not off. Yeah, I'm back. And maybe that's something that needs to be said too. You know, we as people of color still have a lot of ways to grow. And I think what stops us the most is our desire or our belief that we need to continue to only support where we're at and not be a representative of where we're at everywhere else. And until we become more diligent in doing so, the rest of the world will only hear our cries, but they will not see our progress. And maybe we need to give each other a little bit more credit at the possibility of us being capable of doing that. If we only had technology.